The Restless Spirit, a short horror story by Vahid Sajidafar.
Tehran, bustling and noisy with its streets filled with people and cars, had always been a safe place for Arash. But now, he had to go to a remote, mountainous village for his university project, a village he had only heard of by name and frightening rumors, the village of Javaharkala. He left Tehran at 5 in the morning. The sun was still hidden behind the mountains, and the roads were devoid of their usual hustle and bustle. The air was cold, and the scent of damp earth lingered. Along the way, images from his childhood, the voice of his mother, and the smell of freshly brewed tea swirled in his mind. It was as if the flow of time was intertwining, taking him back to distant memories. He reached Javaharkala near noon. The village was nestled in a valley, surrounded by tall, shadowy mountains. The houses were old and dilapidated, with sloping roofs and clay walls. The villagers, few and far between, stared at him as he walked through the narrow, dusty alleys. Their gazes were cold and unsmiling. Women in traditional attire and mostly elderly men. Arash approached an elderly man whose face seemed to tell tales of centuries. "Excuse me, sir. I'm looking for a house where I'm supposed to stay. I'm here for a university project." The old man responded with a deep, concerned look. "The old house at the end of the village, near the cemetery. That's the place." With a sense of dread, Arash made his way to the house. It took his breath away at first sight. A decaying wooden door, broken windows, and a smell of age and fear. As night fell, a heavy silence enveloped everything. Only the sound of crickets and the wind howling through the trees could be heard. Arash was alone in the house and felt as if unseen eyes were watching him from the darkness. Suddenly, he heard a faint sound. A sound that seemed to come from the depths of the earth. His heart raced, and he moved towards the source of the sound. It was coming from the basement. The wooden stairs creaked under his feet. The basement was pitch dark, but a faint light flickered from one corner. As he approached, he saw a young girl in a white dress, pale and motionless, sitting on the ground. Her eyes were fixed on an indeterminate point in the distance. Arash froze. It took all his effort to muster a word. "Who are you? What are you doing here?" Without turning her head, the girl replied in a whisper, "I am from a distant past. From a time when this village was still full of life. But now everything has changed." Everything. Arash felt the walls of the basement closing in on him. His breath became short, and he ran towards the door, but it was locked. He felt invisible hands holding him back. Suddenly, everything went dark. He could only hear the sound of his heavy breathing. When he regained consciousness, he was lying on a bed in the village house. The old man he had seen in the morning stood over him. "Are you all right, son? We found you unconscious in the basement." With a trembling voice, Arash asked, "That girl? Who was she?" The old man sighed and said, "That girl died in an accident in this house years ago. Since then, her spirit has remained here. The village is cursed. Those who come to this house will see shadows of the past." Arash couldn't believe the old man's words, but his experience in the basement was inexplicable. He had to leave. The sooner, the better. Arash returned to Tehran, but he found no peace. Nightmares of the girl and the dark basement of the house in Javaharkala haunted him. Every day, he felt more and more that something from his past was following him. But he had to finish his project. The images and sounds repeated in his mind, preventing him from focusing on his work. One night, as he lay on his bed, he heard a faint sound from the window. The rustling of leaves and whispers that seemed to come from the village. Arash approached the window and looked outside. Something moved in the dark yard. A shadow that seemed to be staring at him. His heart raced. He closed the window and tried to ignore it, but the whispers continued in his head. A few days later, he decided to return to Javaharkala. He needed answers. He reached the village and went straight to the old house. The village elder warned him, "Son, this place is dangerous. Leave and don't come back." But Arash was determined. At night, when everyone was asleep, he went back to the basement. This time he had a flashlight. The dim light of the flashlight illuminated the cold, damp walls of the basement. In one corner, he noticed a small wooden door he hadn't seen before. He opened the door and found stairs leading deeper down. Step by step, he descended the stairs. With each step, the air grew colder, and the smell of mold and dampness intensified. At the bottom of the stairs, he found a small room with only an oil lamp on a table. The young girl was there again, this time looking directly at Arash. Her eyes were full of sorrow and fear. "Why did you come back?" Her voice was trembling and sorrowful. Arash, his voice shaking with fear, replied, "I need to know who you are and why you are here." The girl, in a mournful tone, said, "Years ago, my family and I lived in this village. The villagers didn't like our presence. They thought we were cursed. One night, in a terrible accident, everything was destroyed. I was left alone, and the village turned into a nightmare." Arash felt the air in the room grow heavier, voices from afar, indistinct whispers, and shadows moving in the darkness. Suddenly, everything started to shake. The girl, with endless fear, said, "They are coming. You must leave." Arash tried to climb the stairs, but his feet felt glued to the ground. The shadows came closer, and the whispers grew louder. In a moment, everything went dark, and Arash felt himself sinking into the earth. When he regained consciousness, he was in the village cemetery. On a grave with the girl's name. A handwritten note lay beside the grave, "Don't seek the truth, for you will find only horror." Arash fled Javaherkala with a terror and anxiety that would never leave his mind. But he knew the village's spirit was following him. Every night, he heard the whispers and saw the cold eyes of the girl. Even Tehran no longer felt safe. He felt the girl's spirit, and the village's shadows were always with him. Every time he closed his eyes, he found himself back in the cold, dark basement of that old house, and each night, the whispers grew louder and more terrifying. Arash could no longer return to a normal life. The village and the girl's spirit had become a part of him. The fear and horror still engulfed him, with no escape in sight. Arash decided to understand everything about the girl and the village of Javaherkala. He went to the National Library and began searching through old archives. After weeks of searching, he finally came across an old article detailing the history of Javaherkala. Javaherkala was once a prosperous and happy village. A wealthy and respected family named Muradi lived there. However, on one cold winter night, rumors spread about the family's association with demonic forces. The villagers gradually distanced themselves from the Marathas, and eventually, in a fit of fear and rage, decided to eliminate them. Terrified and frenzied, the villagers stormed the Marathi household. They set it ablaze, killed everyone, and the only survivor was the young daughter, Layla. They trapped her in the basement and locked the door. From that day on, Layla's spirit remained in the basement, waiting for justice and revenge. Upon understanding the truth, Arash decided to return to Javaherkala and free Layla's spirit. He returned to the village with a heart full of fear and determination. He went back to the basement, and this time, he heard Layla's voice more clearly. "You came back?" In a calm voice, Arash replied, "Yes, Layla. I understand the truth. I know what happened to you and your family. I'm here to set you free." Layla looked at Arash. Her eyes were still full of sorrow and terror, but a glimmer of hope was visible in them. Arash moved towards the wall and began digging through the soil and stones. Eventually, he found an old, rusted box. Inside the box was an old notebook that detailed the true story of Layla and her family. Arash asked Layla to show him the spot where her body was. Layla pointed to a corner of the basement, under the old stairs. When Arash approached, he saw Layla's skeletal remains in her decayed clothes. He quickly contacted the police, who removed Layla's remains from the site. Arash felt deep sympathy for the poor girl and thought about the horrific days and nights she must have endured in that dark basement, starving and thirsty until she died. This unfortunate girl had witnessed the brutal massacre of her loved ones by the merciless villagers and had to spend her final moments in the darkness, haunted by those memories. It was the worst kind of death for a person. With a sorrowful smile, Layla vanished. Arash felt a heavy weight lift off his shoulders. The basement was no longer terrifying. He went to the village and shared Layla's story with the villagers. Upon learning the truth, they remembered Layla and her family with regret and sorrow. Arash returned to Tehran. The nightmares and whispers no longer tormented him. He felt that Layla was at peace and that he too had found peace. The village of Javaherkala was no longer a place of fear, but a place where truth and justice had prevailed. Arash, with the thought that he had saved an innocent spirit, returned to his normal life.
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe.